How do you sort out the so-called jargon from real-world practices that work? Do the members of your organization find some business or technology advice utterly confusing? Welcome to Real Talk with Sam Holcman. In this program, we set the record straight, and in terms that business people and technology people can understand. Now, here is your host, Sam Holcman.
Welcome to this edition of Real Talk. I'm Sam Holcman. Thanks for joining me on this broadcast. And the topic for this particular broadcast is who and how is the software that your organization is dependent upon being written. So the who is who's writing the software. And I know none of you are naive enough to suggest that a company like Microsoft does everything internally, or Cisco does everything internally, or Oracle does everything internally. You know that's not the case. And the human beings are sourced from all over the world. So that's the who. Then it comes to the how. How. This is something that is kind of hidden away. When people say, well, what do you mean how? Well, how do they write software? Think about it in the physical world. How do you build a 100-story building? It's very different than how you build a log cabin. So the question to you and I and to your vendors that are, how do they do this? How do they actually build their software? And with all of the cyber attacks going on and all of the changes that are going on in your software on a daily basis, you know that there's issues out there, and using the word issue is a kind phrase. If you remember back a number of years ago, for those of you that remember President Reagan, he had a very famous phrase that sounded very funny, and that phrase was trust but verify. I know that sounds a little strange, and it's not my phrase, it's his phrase, but it really is a great phrase. There are organizations, of course, that in the software business especially, that we're all going to trust. I know I do. But, and there's the but, of course, you want to verify that. And one of the ways to verify that is to get a little bit of information from these particular organizations. And so what we have here is a situation where there's a little bit of investigation that needs to be done. The first one we'd recommend is asking these vendors a very, very simple question. What is your baseline for addressing and managing the changes in the software that you're writing? What is the baseline for addressing and managing change in the software that you're developing? This should not be a fluffy phrase or marketing type of phrase, but something explicit that you can look at. It may be confidential internally and you may have to do some non-disclosure agreements. But what is the development process? The flow of activities, step 1, step 1.1, step 4, step 4.8. Then, what's the baseline for addressing the changes to that? You have the as-is state, you have the changing in the software that's going on, and then you have the desired state. And then, of course, you have to have a closed loop. An open loop produces defects. A closed loop produces quality. So what is the baseline for addressing and managing changes to the software? And then we get into what we refer to as the maturity model. And the maturity model generally has 3 phases that organizations use or can understand when it comes to developing software. The first one is what we call make to order. That is the typical approach that organizations used. And unfortunately, in our young profession of software development, yes, it is a young profession. Maturity level 1, make to order, is handcrafting. Handcrafting. And a lot of organizations do that. Essentially, agile programming. Any type of handcrafting. It doesn't matter if it's waterfall handcrafting or agilely handcrafting quickly. You're still handcrafting. It is the most immature and frankly the most dangerous of these particular things. Number 2, we refer to as provide from stock. And this is a situation where you have fixed software that has a certain set of functionality that organizations use. And that has strengths and limitations. The strength is there is more confidence from a standpoint of security that it's going to be there. But there are restrictions because if that particular piece of software, that piece of software that is in stock, so to speak, is changed, once again, we come back to what's the change process? What's the change process we're looking at? And the most elegant, the most agile, great term, right? Agile approach to software development is what we call assemble to order, where you have elements that you assemble, that each one of those is, quote, certified, unquote, tested, and has a development process that is auditable, and you put those components together. So you have a number of questions that you can ask about this as you go forward. And of course, please don't forget the hardware side of the software business. In other words, it's not just the application software per se, but the software that's being run, for example, if you have a factory, on your programmable logical controllers, your robotic control, or your assembly line software, and of course the software that's in your operating system or the software you use for spreadsheets or word processing or everything else like that. So this is not a, quote, fear situation. This is an open your eyes situation to try to get not only ourselves but the industry to recognize that this concept of construct, maintain, hack, panic, freak out is not going to be a good way to continue. And we see just continuing issues and tens and hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars being wasted because of the industry not having these two elements. And the two elements we're talking about is a baseline for addressing and managing change, and the second is a development process that has maturity behind it. So we are assembling solutions that's going to not only speed up the things, but also make things more secure. So think about that. Talk to your own organization too, not just the external parties, but how are you doing this internally, and also to your software vendors. And let's see if we can move the safety, security, and agility of the software development process forward together.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Talk. Be sure to join your host, Sam Holcman, again for another edition of our program. We'll have more real topics of discussion then.